And I'm back. It's been, a couple of days. I apologize for the long pause in my show, but I want to make sure everybody knows I was not freezing up or getting distracted like Joe Biden. And unlike the House of Representatives, I'm working every day. No half weeks like the U.S. Senate. This is Bryan Rudnick, Episode 7, Rally for the Republic, and I welcome you. I'm working harder every day to make this show better. More importantly, I thank those of you who are listening. We're hitting some milestones here. I really appreciate it. I also appreciate those of you who were bold enough to call and write me with your feedback. Remember, that's feedback at rallyfortherepublic.com. During the last few days, I've done a lot of thinking. No time to barbecue like Chuck Schumer did. I had quality time with the family, but I've also been doing a lot of work for my congressional candidates around the country, trying to make sure a few more of them win. So today's show, I'm going to talk about the politics of the day in the 2024 election. We're not doing any procrastinating or prognosticating about the VP nominees. Not yet. We'll get there. We'll do that thoroughly. And my thoughts on Father's Day, which has a very special meaning to me. And then, of course, we're going to talk a little bit about the judiciary and what's wrong with it. Thanks for listening. I'll be back to you in a moment.
This is a battle cry for the American way of life and a relentless pursuit of truth and justice. It comes from a voice with unmatched experience and unyielding resolve. Join us as we dissect current events and tip the scales in your favor. This is Rally for the Republic with your host, Bryan Rudnick.
Bryan Rudnick, 7th episode, Rally for the Republic. I'm back here, June 18, 2024. It's a Tuesday. Our first topic is politics in the 2024 election. Unlike the warning of the Surgeon General of the United States, I have to admit, looking at social media because I'm forced to do that every day. And I had to see Chuck Schumer's photo op. And, of course, there are the cheap fakes of Joe Biden, whatever those mean. But that's the new White House slogan for anything the Republicans might use to expose Joe Biden's frailty. But first, Chuck Schumer. He's a poser. What else do you want me to say? The man just ruined his reputation even farther, even worse than anybody could have imagined. He was like a dream come true for Republicans. This is a man who really did what most consultants and professional staffers hope the candidate or politician they work for doesn't do. It's like putting the candidate on a horse. They never rode a horse before. It's like handing the candidate a gun, whether it's the shotgun and they hold it the wrong way, whether they put their finger on a trigger of the gun during the photo shoot and the video because they clearly don't have the experience. But it's tantamount to Chuck Schumer not knowing how to barbecue, not trying, not being real and authentic, which is apparently the word of the year or last year. Chuck Schumer wanted to show us that he is not a man of the people. He is just a poser. And it's really, really sad that his staff either was so sick from the E. coli or that they just abandoned him. And it makes him look as frail as Joe Biden. So when Joe Biden's not walking off the stage and you're not holding him by his wrist like Barack Obama did, please don't pay attention to that. That never happened. Remember what the White House told you. Ignore the foreign media that reported it from Europe, too. It never happened. He doesn't freeze. He doesn't get escorted off any stages around the world. Not in Europe, not in Los Angeles, not even on planet Mars. It never happened. It's just another one of those GOP conspiracies like the materials on Hunter Biden's laptop. Sure, we'll go with that. After all, you need to understand that Joe Biden is thinking at levels much farther ahead, much more brilliant than the average American. That's why those over 60 are now supporting him wildly and widely. It's the pickleball crowd. You got to watch out. This year's election will not be about soccer moms, NASCAR dads. It could be about the pickleball crowd. But Joe Biden is so good at courting the pickleball crowd, he is failing with Latinos and black voters. They're abandoning him like passengers on the Titanic. No joke. Every pollster in America, left, right, and center, if such a thing exists, has picked up on that trend. What do you know? Joe Biden kowtowing to black and brown Americans isn't working. The scare tactics, they're not working because America cares about the economy. They care about inflation. They care about law and order, which includes border security. That's the reality. They want the American dream. They don't want the party seeking to destroy the American dream. They don't want the party that redefines gender and keeps their children from getting sports scholarships. Yeah, that's a reality. But Biden and his allies don't want you to think about any of that. Remember, their agenda is Trump is a threat to democracy. Don't be fooled by what you're spending at the grocery store. They want to assure you that inflation is cooling, even though you can't afford anything you're buying. You just can't. A healthcare crisis is going on for women. Even after the Supreme Court said you can get an abortion by mail, apparently there's still a crisis. And he loves you so much that Uncle Joe, back from the dead of L.A., being courted off stage, is now bringing you today, you Americans, you're very special. You're getting 11 million illegal aliens to join you in the ranks of U.S. citizenry. And that's just after the great Americans on the Judiciary Committee at the United States House of Representatives have uncovered a Department of Health and Human Services report that 400,000 teenage males, otherwise known as unaccompanied alien children, have entered our country, thanks to a special program. These great things are brought to you by our friends at the Democrat Party and Joe Biden. But here's the good news. You, the special American, are about to be taxed to high hell because Joe Biden is unleashing his friends at the IRS. These wonderful American agents have decided you are wealthy and you're a tax cheat, and they've already assumed you're guilty. And you're probably sitting here thinking, Brian, what are you talking about? I'm not wealthy. I'm not a billionaire. I'm not in Trump's class. I'm not even a millionaire. Well, guess what? First, they're going to go after the so-called tax cheats of the millionaire and billionaire class because apparently they're claiming they didn't have the resources. And then good Joe Biden showed up. He expanded the size of government. He funded those IRS agents, remember, with the guns. And he put more money in the IRS so they can do audits of the quote-unquote wealthy Americans. Let's think about this. These are people who own businesses, people who reinvest in other businesses. That money creates jobs. It spurs economic growth. These people, I'm sure, have great CPAs. Some of them have big accounting firms that they work with, and they use something called a loophole. I'm sure you've heard Donald Trump talk about that. You've heard members of Congress talk about it. Loophole. Loopholes are legal unless you're a leftist who believes that everybody should pay their socialist fair share. And then you're guilty of having made money, having participated in the American dream. Apparently you're guilty because Joe Biden's leftist spending programs need at least $50 billion to keep going. What do they need 50? That's 50 billion with a B, like boy, like Biden, like bad. Okay, so $50 billion to fund leftist spending programs. What do you think they're paying for? Schools for illegal alien children, housing for illegal aliens, healthcare for illegal aliens, the hotels in New York City for illegal aliens, a few of them in Chicago, things like that, right? Okay, because after all, if you're listening to me, if you have time to listen to me, you're probably a wealthy American who can afford to contribute to that 50 billion. And if you think I'm exaggerating, what do you think happens when they decide it's 51 billion or 60 billion? Every American will be paying their quote unquote fair share. That's what happens in socialism. So while Joe and half the Senate are in town this week and the House is out because the House, they voted on the National Defense Authorization Act last week, and very, very big, important bill. The Senate is not in agreement with the House because the leftists, what do they want to do? They need to undo everything the House Republicans did because the House Republicans sought to undo everything the leftists wanted to do. And they want to spend your money. Big surprise. What do they want to do? Abortion tourism for members of the military. House GOP put in amendments to stop that. Why? Because they think you should reimburse people in the military to go get abortions. Okay. Now, there's a lot to that topic, but let's keep going. I want to make sure I get you the whole list. Now, The left, very, very upset. You can no longer join the military and get your transgender reassignment surgeries or transition surgeries or whatever you're doing to turn Bob into Jane. Okay, that's one of the things the left wants to stop. The Republicans put a nice amendment in to try to deal with that. And then, of course, you've got to have our DEI programs. That's diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's called the dumbing down of America as far as I'm concerned. As we know, you go woke, you go broke. So instead of military readiness, the left wants to have their neo-racism of diversity, equity, and inclusion programming, which House conservatives have tried to kill for a second year in a row. They want to redirect military efforts away from climate change. That's the House Republicans. Why? Because we think that maybe our military should be a more lethal fighting force. What a concept to a military. But that's what we're trying to do here. So we want to, of course, common sense Americans, we want a fighting force, a true military, one that scares Vladimir Putin, one that scares China. No, we ain't getting that. We're getting DEI instead. We're going to defund the U.S. military pier off the coast of Gaza, which has basically been moved to Israel now, because, as you know, Hamas, who controls Gaza, has no desire to see their people fed, and then they're going to blame Israel. So the House Republicans want to do away with the hundreds of millions of dollars there and the funding of, bringing aid to the Palestinian people. Gaza residents is really what they're called. Palestinian doesn't exist in that part of the country. I mean, they're just a bunch of Arabs occupying land that doesn't belong to them. And why is the U.S. military stuck with aid for these people when Arab nations in the area refuse to do their part? Interesting, right? Okay, let's talk a little bit about SCOTUS. I want to make sure everybody gets this point. I'm going to keep banging this drum. Last week, we had decisions from SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States. They were mostly procedural. Do not listen to the noise from the left. They're making noise. That's all they do. Cable news, The View, all those idiots. They've just got to fill the airwaves. They're going to tell you stuff. They're going to want to make people frantic. They want to scare people because they don't like the idea that the Republican Party, conservatives, common sense Americans, and Donald Trump are going to take back this country. So they're going to do everything they can to scare you. They're going to tell you there's a healthcare crisis for women. They're going to tell you there's mass murders that will immediately start thanks to bump stocks being legal. What they fail to explain to you is the beauty of democracy. See, the Supreme Court justices, whether or not you like what their decisions were, said, hey, we got process and procedure in our legal system here in America. Follow the process. The executive branch, guess what? You need to follow the process too. Congress makes the laws. You don't determine what the definition of an assault weapon is or an automatic machine gun or anything else. And hey, citizens, when the FDA is considering a pill and you think it's bad to kill babies, come talk to the FDA sooner and fight that sooner so you get what you want. We're not the last stop of giving you a circumvention around the law. Supreme Court wants to be clear about that. There's a law. Follow it. Everybody, from a president on down to doctors, follow the law. That's what they told you. Nothing more, nothing less. They said you want to redress your grievances? Go back through the process and do it. You're not prohibited. So don't let the left fool you. Don't let them distract you. Especially don't make them think that there was merits to those cases other than procedure. Because really what you need to focus on, it was a reminder, in New York 16th Congressional District, everybody who cares about America and Israel needs to put their attention to getting rid of Jamal Bowman. Remember, this is the week that early voting has started. Okay, and it continues, and they're going to vote on him. Final primary election day is next Tuesday. Kick the man out. He's a crook, an anti-Semite, a socialist, hangs out with CARE, which is a Hamas-supporting group, hangs out with Rashida Tlaib. He hates America. He hates his constituents. I'm going to keep the link to the map and the zip codes in the show notes so you can look at it and send it to your friends and loved ones. Okay. I'm going to try to get through this next topic in a moment. We'll get on to Father's Day, and I'll be right back.
You are listening to Rally for the Republic with your host, Bryan Rudnick.
Bryan Rudnick, Rally for the Republic. I'm back. Before we talk about Father's Day, I want to make sure that for those of you looking to debate the issue of Joe Biden's double whammy of amnesty, with your friends and loved ones. If you're like me and you've got a relative that you love dearly, that you enjoy being with until you talk politics and you've got to hang up the phone. Sometimes you hang up the phone very passionately and upset, and you wonder why they can't see the forest for the trees like you do. I have some tidbits to take away. I am the grandson of Holocaust survivors. I am the descendant of legal immigrants to this country, and this country is a country of legal immigrants. It is not intended to be the country of illegal immigrants. It is not intended to be the country where everybody and anybody could show up. We actually have rule of law to prevent that, okay? If you don't think it's acceptable that somebody comes down your street and murders people on your street or drives drunk and hits somebody on your street, then I don't understand what your problem is with wanting to enforce the rule of law when it comes to securing our border or preventing the wrong people from entering this country. Because, see, yeah, we've had a problem with illegal immigration and amnesty for decades in this country. And many presidents have thought it'd be a good thing to just turn the other cheek and let amnesty happen. And Barack Obama had a big DACA program where he let in 528,000 children. Okay, they were here. Just let them be. Just let them be, huh? Okay. Rule of law doesn't apply. Okay, if that's what you think. Joe Biden, last amnesty executive order was going to be for 350,000 people. This week, we got a new proposal. They're estimating there are 1.1 to 11 million people who are going to get a quote-unquote pathway to citizenship. They're undocumented, but they're married to Americans and things like that. So that's what they're about to do. Do you think these people aren't going to be registered Democrats upon earning citizenship? You really think that magically we're just giving away citizenship with no strings attached? Really? Okay, if that's what you think, good luck to you, as my grandfather would say, and the Red Sox. But I don't think that's what's happening here, folks. I think we're letting people in with diseases and fentanyl and drug trafficking and sex trafficking and a whole lot of horrors that are going to turn into mother upon mother on TV being raped and murdered like we see currently on our TVs this week, the mother of five. Just like we saw the college girl down in Georgia. And we have seen over and over again similar attacks like in New York City and elsewhere that came from people who have entered our country illegally. Now, we all know there are people truly seeking sanctuary in this great land of ours, and many people need it and deserve it, but we need to vet these people properly, and blanket amnesty is not the answer. And there is no way the government of the United States has the resources to deal with the 400,000 minor male unaccompanied children that were allowed into this country, or the 528,000 DACA recipients under Barack Obama, let alone the 1.1 to 11 million people Joe Biden wants to enter full-blown citizens of this country. The resources aren't there. So guess what? Government's just going to let things happen. Okay, let's switch the topic. Something very near and dear to me that I'm going to try to get through succinctly and really try to drive a point home. This is one of those topics that not only bothers me, I know many of others it bothers. Father's Day. There's a lot of aspects to Father's Day and what it symbolizes. You know, it's meant to be a day to appreciate fathers in this country or the male role models in your life, because obviously not all families are biological anymore. And there's great men out there who've decided to adopt or raise children that they didn't biologically bring into this world. Those men are to also be praised. Just like there are moms out there who have decided to step up and raise children that are biologically not their own, or they play a mom figure. So Father's Day, I'm a father. It's a very important day. I love celebrating it with my children. Unfortunately, didn't get to celebrate it with one of my children this past weekend, but had a great time with my other. But the thing that's interesting, and I'm not the only one who pointed this out, is that Father's Day really does play second fiddle to Mother's Day. Happens after Mother's Day, about a month later, as you all know. Retail sales, as much as retailers try to benefit from sales related to Father's Day, just like they do with Mother's Day, the numbers came out. Retail sales are nowhere near as strong for Father's Day as they are for Mother's Day. And if you're like me and so many other Americans and you went out and you celebrated Mother's Day at a brunch, Mother's Day brunch is usually unbelievable and you have to get dressed up and show reverence to mom. For Father's Day, nowhere near the same. Father's Day is never as formal. It's never as fancy. It's nowhere near as comprehensive and elaborate as Mother's Day. Okay, so we don't need the flowers like mothers. And people sometimes think a barbecue is good enough. But it's interesting. We live in this society where now one of the biggest topics that we hear about in politics and in culture is the importance of gender equality and representing and treating all genders with respect. Now, some people believe there are all genders. And it came up yesterday, even in a conversation with some older, great Americans that I know who are looking at the update on their iPhone and wanting to know why they have to put a pronoun in for everybody that they add to their contact list, because it's just asininely ridiculous that people need pronouns other than great American. So you've got a man and a woman. That's what God gave us. That's what God has made very clear exists. It's not like when you're Hunter Biden and you're filling out the form for the background check on your firearm purchase where you can even be non-binary. No, that doesn't exist. But in the age of Joe Biden, apparently that exists. Nobody's ever met a non-binary person. I asked some of the most liberal people I know, do you know any non-binary people? They've yet to even be able to tell me what a non-binary human being is. Maybe it's not a human being for all I know. But I'm looking forward to figuring that one out one day, if such a thing exists. But we're in a society you're supposed to respect gender. Mom and dad are nouns. They're not pronouns. They're proper nouns to some extent. They're titles for people. And they're titles that should be given a respect and reverence. And we have, for decades and decades, we've had these movements in our country to make, women equal citizens. And that occurred with women's suffrage. And then all of a sudden in the 60s, it transitioned a bit and women weren't supposed to have these traditional roles. They were supposed to be paid the same as men, treated the same as men. It wasn't just about voting anymore. And mom wasn't going to have a role in the house anymore. And as the data points out, the moment mom started being in the home less and working so she could have that equality, there was the latchkey kid syndrome. And you had children who, were not always being raised by a mom and a dad anymore. And problems have occurred since then. And we saw that. And I'm not just talking about what just happened on our college campuses, crime rates, drug rates, you name it. And now we have to be concerned about whatever a transgender person is and a non-binary and those who qualify in this big umbrella of the LGBTQ plus and minus and whatever they are. And dad has been overshadowed. We now are in a society that for decades has decided mom is great and wonderful, which God has told us mom is great and wonderful. God has told us holiness begins with the woman in a home. That's never been disputed, should not be disputed. But somehow dad's role in the family unit, in the home, has been degraded and demolished. This is not something I'm exaggerating about. This is really happening. We live in a society where dads are looked at very differently, in a very negative light. You're not supposed to be an alpha male anymore. You're not supposed to teach your child to become an alpha male, your sons to become an alpha male, because that would be insensitive. It probably violates some DEI rule that I haven't read yet, but that's my understanding. And you can be sure I'm not reading the DEI rules because they're ridiculous and they're never going to remain in place because anybody who's followed them has learned that they have to abandon them eventually because they just don't work and they don't make sense. And of course, you go woke, you go broke. So here we are in a society and we're supposed to teach boys to be more effeminate, less masculine. Government's replacing God in our lives. Government's replacing mom and dad in our lives. It's being allowed to indoctrinate our children. And we're getting warnings about social media and these kids. They're going to have pronoun day instead of Mother's Day and Father's Day because we're messing up our kids. And apparently it'll be offensive to have Mother's Day and Father's Day. So let's burn down cities like with BLM and burn down college campuses and turn into terrorist sympathizers, because when you don't have a mom and dad in the home, or mom and dads and people of those genders and roles in the life of a child, you don't have norms, you don't have structure, you're not teaching kids to be raised properly, to understand what rules are, to understand why it's so important to have these foundational beliefs, why God has made it clear these beliefs are needed in our lives. We had these movements last century that have infiltrated this century, have gotten farther to the left, more woke, as I was talking about moments ago. And what they have done to destroy the role of fathers in our society has bled into the judiciary. so badly that if you're a father going into family court, you're practically screwed. And I know there's so many people out there who say, oh, that doesn't exist anymore. Laws have been updated. Courts do better. Let's remember something. The role of a court is to uphold the Constitution, not make law. The role of a judge is to follow the law, enforce the law, not make the law, and definitely not demonstrate a bias. But any man who has been in a family court, whether the judge is male or female, has typically learned that the judge is biased, the judge is a crook, and the judge will screw over the father at a moment's notice without a reason. Now, you might be saying, Bryan, you're probably jaded because you spent 14 plus years in the family court process and you're still waiting on a judge like 90 or so days later to make a ruling after she's heard hours upon hours of professional therapist testimony about damage to your son by from a professional board certified therapist and the actions of your former wife. But hey, don't take it from me. Go find out from somebody who's actually been in family court. Great example I want to bring to your attention is American hero, Army veteran, and former U.S. Senate candidate Sean Parnell. Some of you may remember that name. He was about to become the U.S. Senator from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania until damaging reports about his custody battle came out. Accusations were made about abuse against the former wife, abuse against the children. I believe he has 3, 5, some significant family, beautiful family that he posted a picture of the other day. And he did this as kind of a clarion call to other fathers out there going through the same thing. He had a lot to say about what happened over the last couple of years. He went from looking like an American hero to a criminal, to a deadbeat father, to an abusive husband and an abusive father, to being vindicated and now has, I believe, full custody of his children because he stayed the course. His reputation was practically damaged. This was a man that most Americans looked up to. But in the family court system, a lawyer, scumbag lawyer, of which that's like an oxymoron because that pretty much goes hand in hand in the family court process, started making accusations and put it out there. And a judge, probably without due process, bought the lies hook, line, and sinker. And Parnell had to spend years fighting for his children. So he went public about this. He put up a very nice message on X, and he gave some interviews. One of the important quotes that he put out there was he said, "To the fathers navigating the family court system who may be deprived of your children's company today, I deeply empathize with your pain. It is hell that I would not wish upon my worst enemy. Stay strong. If you can't afford an attorney, so what? Represent yourself. As a father in family court, the deck will always be stacked against you. There will be many unjust moments when you just feel like quitting. Don't. Continue to fight for your children and perseverance through the difficulties. The hell will end. Just hang in there." And I can tell you, Sean Parnell is right. But you know what? That doesn't mean it's acceptable, because it's not. It's why we need to take back our courts at all levels of this country. Children get hurt in the process of divorce because we have bad, corrupt judges. It's not just because we have lawyers trying to continue to churn a bill. It's not just because we have crazy ex-spouses out there of any gender pulling stuff that may be legitimate or illegitimate. The reality is we have lazy and crooked judges who don't do their jobs. So what happens? Children grow up without a parent. That's very damaging. There's decades of science that explain why it's damaging. Yet this happens. And you, the American public, are paying for this damage. You're paying for these court proceedings. You're paying for the child when they're screwed up and incarcerated. You're paying for the child when they get the substance abuse addiction. And that leads to all sorts of things, from institutionalizing them to who knows what program, to eventually when they could be homeless without a family because nobody knows where they've gone. You might think that's extreme, but it's not. The data supports it. So Sean Parnell understood something. So did Governor Ron DeSantis and NFL legend Jack Brewer, who a couple of years ago decided to put out a program to help encourage men to come back to their families, to be men, to be fathers to their children, because they recognize the system is broken. The system encourages men to walk away from their children because of the hell of family court. Because some of these men get thrown in jail because they tried to advocate for themselves in front of a judge who didn't want to hear it because the judge is biased. I've had many men tell me these stories. Okay. Legitimate issues of concern about an ex-spouse who may cause physical harm to a child, and a judge refused to listen, but threw the father in jail for opening their mouth and trying to communicate. These stories are so real and happen so often that it's amazing that we have turned a blind eye to it for so long. And I say no more. Governor DeSantis started something. I know in some states they've tried to fix alimony laws. They've tried to fix custody laws. Here in Florida, we finally recognize that mothers and fathers are equal, and moms and dads will now, by default, get 50-50 custody. Now, this is not a perfect scenario because there are some loopholes built in. You could be sure the Florida Family Bar made sure to throw in some loopholes because they don't want to have to go into the poorhouse. They want to be able to keep, milking your pain and milking you into bankruptcy. That's what they do to a lot of people. So they don't solve problems. The courts and the lawyers who are writing checks to their judges that they're in front of are milking you into bankruptcy so they can keep it going. It is truly a racket. Governor DeSantis sees that. Now, like all legislation, it works the process of sausage making. Doesn't always come out perfect. There's still work to be done here in Florida. There's still work to be done around the country. We need to make fathers equal citizens in family court. We need to make sure that children are protected by having a mom and a dad when a mom and dad are responsible to raise the child. And we need to remember that our courts are run by people, men and women, human beings who just happen to wear black robes to work. These people are mostly corrupt. They're human beings. They're not perfect. God didn't make them perfect. He made none of us perfect. So don't act like these judges are perfect. Don't listen to any lawyer who tells you these judges are honorable. And of course, they're going to do the right thing. They've been vetted. Like Teddy Roosevelt said, bull feathers. I'll be back to you in a moment with more on the judiciary.
You are listening to Rally for the Republic with your host, Bryan Rudnick.
Bryan Rudnick, Rally for the Republic. I'm back here, running longer than we thought today, but let's talk a little bit about the judiciary. Never like to miss a few good opportunities to attack the people in black robes. Outside of family court, they've got these judges, great Republican judges in the state of North Carolina, who have apparently admitted to violating the state judicial code of conduct, but the Supreme Court there has refused to punish judges who have admitted to violating the state code of conduct. So I ask you, what does it say for the local judge, the county judge, the circuit court judge, when the Supreme Court of the United States and the Supreme Court of a state refuse to punish judges with ethical problems who violate code of conduct? What does it say? What do you think's going on here? Courts have become like the Ivy League universities that have embraced BLM and the Hamas protesters. They don't want to admit that they've ever made a mistake. They don't want to admit that a member of their so-called esteemed body could do wrong. This is an example. As I end today, I want to remind you, this is just another example of why we need to fight back hard and keep fighting to take back our country. These are the same kind of people who just before I decided to broadcast today told Donald Trump at the New York Appeals Court he still can't get around the gag order. So what do you think they're saying? Why is it constitutionally required or permitted for them to block free speech? They want to, let's think about this. Someone thinks they can stifle Donald Trump. We all know that's not a reality. And they want to keep him quiet. For what? They're wrong. Think about this. Donald Trump won't be stifled, people. And the only thing that they're doing, these judges are demonstrating that Alvin Bragg and his far left cronies have something to protect. It is not the administration of justice. It's baloney. If this was the administration of justice, the first thing they would do is say, let him speak his mind. Let him be like Hunter Biden and put everything on the record and we'll use it against him. No, Donald Trump is exposing the con. Once again, the calculus here is simple. See, Alvin Bragg really wants to go for the award of Best Show Trial of the Year. And he knows Jack Smith is basically out of the running, so he's competing with the gal down in Georgia. And see, the problem is New Yorkers, they never want to give a chance to a Southerner. The Civil War hasn't ended. They still want to fight the South. So we're going to see who wins that. But in reality, we, the American people, we're losing because we've allowed our courts to continue to act this way. We've allowed them to usurp our power, and we need to take it back. If you believe that this is a country of, for, and by the people, where our government must respond to us, respond to our desires, our will, our interpretation of the rule of law, then they need to be held accountable. That's what we're doing here to Rally for the Republic. We're holding our government accountable as we take back our country and put it back on the right course. So if you agree with me, keep listening. Please stay in touch. Feedback at rallyfortherepublic.com and let me know what you think. And make sure you share this episode and all others with your loved ones. Remind your liberal friends and family members that 1 million to 11 million illegal aliens entering this country who we can't account for is more dangerous than they realize. Thank you. God bless America. Let's keep rallying for our republic.
Thank you for joining us on Rally for the Republic, where we are fighting for America's future. Visit 1776coalition.com. Rally for the Republic podcast is available on Spotify, Amazon, Apple, and Google Podcasts. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and download. Join Bryan Rudnick next time as we continue to fight for the American way of life and challenge the hypocrisy. This is Rally for the Republic.